So Jessica Mays is on the Kentucky State Beekeepers Association board, where she served as president in 2022. She lives in Bourbon County, where she has been keeping bees for over 20 years, and she's currently got about 25 beehives. She's recently expanded her queen rearing operation to promote more local mite-fighting genetics, and if you want to know more about that, she might talk to you. Otherwise, you can talk to her later. It's super interesting. And for her full-time job, also really interesting, I think, she's the corporate metallurgist for Lexmark in Lexington. So without further ado, let's welcome Jessica Mays.
Thank you. Another cool thing is bats are one of the most important pollinators. So people think pollinators, they think monarchs and bees, and there's a lot of them out there. So I appreciate being the only animal, I think, on Fruit and Vegetable Day. So we get a little bit of a little bit of insight into animals here. So I'm going to go through this pretty quick, and they say it's recorded so that you can watch it again in slow motion maybe, and I'll leave time at the end. So because one of the things is for bees, there's all kinds of stuff that we're gonna talk about, and that'll be everything from the bees themselves, honey, pollination, hive products, and just I was telling Nat, answering questions, it's everything from the bees themselves to beeswax, to honey, to pollination, to I want to breed and sell queens, to I just need them for my garden. So there's so many aspects to beekeeping. I will tell you, we're going to go through this kind of quick, but any of these, I would say any slide in here could be a whole day. So there's so many aspects to bees that don't feel like, I didn't understand that, because I've been doing this over 20 years and I still have questions. I still learn things every year. Every day I'm in with the bees, so it's always something that they can teach us. So, and bees are the only insects that we farm and the only insect that we eat a product from. So fun facts there that they're not native to the United States, but they've been here about 400 years. So we kind of consider them native at this point. And because we can move them and more or less we think we can control them. I'm not sure who controls who in my bee yard, but we think we can, so that makes it nice. So I'm going to talk about the Langstroth hive. This is the pretty typical beehive you see when you look out into a field and you see all the white boxes. And the thing is that's illegal. It is a legal agreement that we have to have removable frames. So even though the skeps, the bee trees and stuff are really interesting, it is a legal agreement that the state apiarist, who is Tammy Horn-Potter, and she was here earlier today, but she has to be able to come back and inspect. There are diseases, there's over 30 diseases that bees can get, and a lot like any other agricultural animal. They need a home, they need food and water, they need medication, they need to be cared for. So it's a lot like any other agriculture. But specifically for the bees, there is a thing called American foul brood that we luckily only have a case every couple of years. But it's so dangerous in the bee yard that the hives have to be burnt. So there is no escape from American foul brood. So for that very reason, we have to be able to inspect the hives, and that's a legal requirement that you have to be able to remove the frames and inspect primarily for American foul brood. So what I'm going to show you here is kind of what's in a hive when you see those boxes. And this is kind of hard to do too, because we've got people who've never seen a beehive, and I know some of you have been keeping bees for a little while, so just kind of bear with me as we go through the details. But this is a hive that starts on the bottom with everything from a, we've got a lid on the bottom. Let's see if I can get by. There we go. We've got a lid on the top there, an inner cover. Then we've got boxes, usually 10 frame. I've got an 8 frame out there that you all are welcome to look at. And then there are different heights. There are supers that are a little shorter. There's brood boxes that are taller. And then we've got a base. Because the main thing is you want to make sure that they're protected from snow and ice and rain, that sort of thing. So we give them this nice home to live in. The different variations, it's like anything else. Somebody comes out with something new every year, and it's probably in my barn. So it's kind of one of those things that everything new, and I usually end up going back to this. But that's basically what happened. That's basically what's in a beehive. Next thing is, if you're thinking about getting bees, where do I put them? How much room do I need? The beauty of beehives is we've got rooftop beehives in downtown Lexington. People would never know they're there. A bee will, they'll forage about a 3-mile radius. So because they're not dependent on what you plant, and it takes about 2 million flowers to make 1 pound of honey. So even though I say plant pollinators, put something out there for the bees, honestly, I'm not going to make a huge impact. With 20 hives in the summer, there may be 60,000 bees in a hive. So I can't get that kind of nectar going. But that being said, you don't need a lot of land to do bees. So you can do a lot of bees on a lot of land, or you can do a rooftop in town, or you can do a city. We have a lot of, I'm with Bluegrass Beekeepers in Lexington, and we have a lot of beekeepers that just keep a couple hives in their backyard and neighborhoods. So there are some neighborhood association kind of questions there, but for the most part, you don't need a lot of land. You don't need to build barns. You don't need to build fences. You don't need a lot of things that you need for some of the larger agriculture endeavors. So this is actually the Google Earth picture of my beehives. They're out in front of my house, because I used to have them kind of spread out. We've got 25 acres, so not a big farm, but I found it was out of sight, out of mind. The more those bees were in front of me, I can actually drive around mine if it's a cold day in winter to see what's going on. So you kind of want them someplace where you can keep track of them. You're going to have to be in them every week or couple weeks, this time of year especially. So you want them someplace you can get to. Also full sun. There are things called a small hive beetle that thrive in warm or even slightly chilly, but moist soil. They pupate in the soil. They're a beetle that gets in and destroys comb. So that's much reduced if you're out in the sun. Also, bees have to keep the queen at 92 degrees all winter. So when it was minus 20 wind chill around Christmas, that queen and that brood was still at 92 degrees. So that required, they don't hibernate, they don't even really take a break. So it's much easier for them to cool the hive in the summer than it is to heat the hive in the winter. So for that reason, it's better to put them in full sun and give them plenty of ventilation to be able to cool the hive. But don't rely on them to, if they're in a shady area, to be able to heat that in the winter. It's just going to be an uphill battle. So also face east if possible. Bees are like us, in the summer when that sun's coming in early morning, you're ready to get up and go. So that's another reason if they're in the shade and they don't realize it's daytime, they might be slacking. So we don't need bees that sleep in the morning. So I face mine right into the sun, everybody's ready to go. So that's not mandatory, but this is kind of, if you're thinking about, I don't think I have a good place for bees, these are just some things to consider that help. And also an easy, in the easy place to check is these things are incredibly heavy. I had no idea that how much manual work these are. A deep full of honey can be 70 or 80 pounds. So when I had my nice location by the creek and I thought, oh, it looks beautiful there, I've got to haul that thing up the hill. So I learned that kind of the hard way. So make it where you can get a four-wheeler or something that you can help give yourself some assistance. And that's part of why there's different size boxes. A shallow super 8-frame is going to weigh a fraction of what 10-frame deeps full of honey will. So if you're considering what kind of hive to get, you want to do this long term. Buy all this stuff so that as you age and as you may change abilities, you can still deal with it. So that's an advantage to the smaller, shorter hives. So because they are heavy. So let's talk a little bit about who's inside the hive. You've got one queen, about 50,000 workers. All those workers are female, and about 10% are drones. About 10,000 are drones. The only job of the drone is to go out and mate with another queen. So out in what's called a drone congregating area. So in that hive, every bee you see out on flowers and out and doing anything in the hive is a worker bee. So, and interestingly, the worker bees only live about 6 weeks. A queen can live about 2 years. The only difference is they feed the egg, the larva, a little bit different, a royal jelly, a different food when she's in the larva stage, and she becomes a queen. So you've got about 60,000 bees. Also put up there, queen bees, we color code them by the year so that you know who your queen is and how long she's been in there. This is a brood frame. The frame has honey on the outside corners, brood on the inside. So I can look at that frame and see if I've got a lot of brood, I've got a good queen. And it's just like anything else. You want the food near the nursery. So you put the honey there near the baby bees. They make bee bread out of pollen. Pollen's protein. So they make bee bread out of a combination of nectar and pollen. And that's what they feed the babies. Everything that comes in the hive is honey or is nectar or pollen. So that's all they've got to work with. They make the wax. They make all the propolis. They make everything else that they use. And talking about how far they actually forage, they communicate by something called a waggle dance. And you can look that up on YouTube, but it is very, very cool. The bee comes back, shares a little bit of the nectar that they've been able to get, or the pollen, with another bee. They do this kind of figure 8 dance that tells how long they do the dance is how long they should fly, and the direction relative to the sun is where that source is. So that may be 3 miles away. They're saying this nectar is available 2.4 flight miles at 3 degrees to the sun. You know, I mean, I can't get where I'm going with Siri, so for them to be able to come back and do that is pretty amazing. So mainly our job as a beekeeper is just to stay out of the way. You know, I mean, I say that in all seriousness. We make sure and give them support, but pretty much we just don't go screw it up. So like I said, with overwintering, the queen has to stay at 92 degrees. So this is showing a FLIR IR camera that I can point to my hive in the winter and tell if I've got, so that's just pointed at the box, to tell where my cluster is. They'll overwinter a small cluster, stay around the queen, stay around the brood. So that FLIR camera, I can just kind of go out there as I go by and make sure they're in there. I don't want to get in the hive unless it's about 50 degrees. So it takes them, again, about, to keep that queen that warm, it takes them about 60 pounds of honey to get through winter. So they're doing, it's just like kids at recess. You go out and run around and come back in and stand next to someone, yeah, you're hot, get away. But for bees, that's an advantage because they're able to use that as those carbohydrates, that sugar, they get in this bee ball, they go to the outside and get honey, come back in, run in place next to the queen, and then when they're out of carbohydrates, they're out of that energy, go back and get more honey. So that's constantly going on all winter. So I need to make sure they've got enough honey in there to be able to do that all winter. And in our climate, it's about 60 pounds. So that means I don't want to take honey in the fall that could reduce so that they starve this time of year. Or, you know, most of the starvation for bees comes the end of February. So you want to make sure that they have plenty to get through so that I get surplus honey in the summer. So they can handle cold and dry. They can't handle fairly chilly and wet. So the biggest problem is you want ventilation. They can deal with that. But if you close that hive up, just like our homes in the winter, that if you get condensation on the top and that cold water drips on your queen, she's dead. And there's nothing you can do in the winter if you lose a queen. You can't find a mated queen. You just, you know, you're done. So they do well with overwintering. The biggest battle, and I apologize kind of for the eye chart here, but you know the intention is that I can give you all this information and you can go back and watch this more slowly or look this stuff up. Varroa mites are the biggest battle for bees, and they came here in the 1980s, and knocked out about 85% of the wild bee population. So almost all of the quote-unquote wild bees now are actually bees that have swarmed from domestic hives. But the varroa mites feed on the fat bodies of bees. So not only are they doing damage to that bee by feeding on the fat body for those winter bees that have to survive that cold climate, but they also spread these 30 or so diseases, viruses, pathogens that we're talking about. They spread those, and those mites have developed such an intricate reproductive system that this bee is their optimum host, and they ultimately kill them out. So it's not a very good system, but you need to regularly monitor and treat. We say there are beekeepers and bee havers. And the bee havers don't have bees for very long if they're not keeping track of things like mites. So mites are by far the biggest battle that we have. There's also, like I said, the small hive beetle. They're just a little, I've got the picture of them there that you can see. They're just a small black beetle. A strong hive can make it with the beetles, but a weak hive, they'll take over. So they're just an opportunistic little beetle, lives in the hive. There's wax moths, and wax moths are pretty much after a hive has died. A wax moth won't kill a hive, but as soon as that hive is weak enough, that moth flies in there and cabbages on this really nice stuff. We've got this honey, this pollen, it's sheltered. For the same reason the bees like to live there, so do all these pests. So you have to keep an eye on, if you lose a hive, get that equipment out, run it through the freezer so that you kill any kind of small hive beetle or wax moth larvae or eggs that are in there. And then you can reuse, no problem with reusing the equipment, but just salvage it and make sure. There's also raccoons, possums, skunk, the typical critters that are, cause problems everywhere else, but they're not really a significant pest, not so much as bears. So I know some of you all are in areas, I'm in Bourbon County. We don't have bears right now that I know of, but there was one downtown UK earlier in the fall, so who knows where they are. So that's, but it really is an issue. I mean, Pooh Bear is a real thing. So once they realize not only is there nice, yummy larvae in there, but there's all this sweet honey. Once a bear's found your hives, yeah, good luck. So it's, and in fact, there's actually beekeepers on the emergency protection councils, especially in states where there are bears, because you're transporting little bit February or so. Almonds are exclusively pollinated by honeybees, and 85% of the honeybees in the United States are in California in February for almonds. So my little 20 hives doesn't matter much for that, but that means you've got I-75, I-64, all of these interstates carrying truckloads that may have 800 or so boxes of bees on them. So you've seen those on CNN, you see them on the news where a bee truck overturns. We've got beekeepers that are on the emergency list to go help if that happens. We've got one here because of the interstate system. So we go out and help with the bees. To be clear, I saw a beekeeper on the news with one of the Utah, had a huge big disaster with that, and nobody was hurt, but the bears got to the bees before the beekeepers did. So they were interviewing, and they told this beekeeper, he said, I'm here for the bees. He said, I'm not here for the bears. So they were all back in the truck, and there was 2 or 3 black bears just got it. So bears are, fortunately for me, not a problem, but they are in Kentucky. So another thing that we want to talk about is how do you get bees? So there's multiple ways, but especially as homesteaders, we want to be self-sufficient. So you can go out and buy bees. You can buy a package of bees that, interestingly enough, show up at the post office at about 5 in the morning, and you will get a call at like 5:01, because I had no idea how much went on at the post office at 5 o'clock in the morning. But there's crickets, there's night crawlers, there's chicks. But if you say you're there for the bees, you are the front of the line. So they do show up at the post office. That's an option. There's also what we call nucleus hive, or nukes. And that's basically a 5-frame small mini hive. So it's got a queen in there, it's got frames of brood, frames of food. The beauty about the nuke is you just put that in a 10 frame and it's expanding already. The package has a queen in it, but there's no resources. There's no wax, there's no food, there's nothing else in there. So it used to be packages were about $100, nukes were about $150. Now packages are about $130, nukes are about $150. A nuke is by far recommended over a package. And there's swarms. You know, everybody calls kind of in this time of year, you know, there's a bazillion bees. They're hanging on this tree in my yard and they're attacking everybody. And then me who wants the free bees, I get out there and all of a sudden, you know, no, it's about 500 bees. They're 40 feet up. They're not bothering anybody. And you know, just leave them a couple days and they'll go. That's the sign of a healthy hive. That's a hive that's gotten so populated that they've expanded, and you know, they kicked all the kids out and they're gone. So that's free bees. So there's lots of ways to get bees, and you want to just work on being able to be self-sufficient with that, and that's make your own nukes, splits, that kind of thing. Or learn how to raise queens. With a queen, because the queen is the mother of everybody in the hive, she's the only bee that's laying fertilized eggs. So a fertilized egg is a worker, and an unfertilized egg is a drone. So that is something that's controlled by the rest of the population in the beehive. But that queen is the mother of everybody in the hive. So if those worker bees only live about 6 weeks, then if you replace the queen in 2 months, you've got totally new genetics. So that's if she's not a good honey producer, if she's aggressive, if she's not laying enough, you've got a whole new population in a couple months. So we want to control for things like that. The queen's controlling all of that. So queen genetics are one of the biggest things in beekeeping. And there's actually instrumental insemination. So you can get an instrumentally inseminated queen, and that's something that they're expensive. They're $300 queens, but if you really want to control your genetics and do grafting from that, you can do that. So we'll talk about the honey. We'll talk about honey real quick. Honey is determined. So the flavor of the honey is determined by the floral sources, and again, 2 million flowers, 3-mile radius. You know, it's great. You know, my mom's always bringing lavender plants out and planting them in my front yard. And, you know, I just have to say thank you and not explain all this because that's, you know, a 0.000 something percent of my honey. But it's awesome. And if everybody did that, we'd be fine. So, but basically what happens here is you've got, this is a queen excluder because I don't want the queen up in my super laying eggs. So I have a queen excluder. That top box is a super. It's all honey. It's all honey frames in there, no brood. And then we just go out and take that honey super off and bring it back. You bring it back and extract the honey. So we want to leave pollen in there so we don't extract it too small. Pollen's typically 200 microns or so. So you don't want to filter so small that you filter the good stuff out because there's all kinds of microbials, antioxidants. But these pollen particles are what makes the difference for you. And it's all a function of the nectar source. So the different dark, light honey, spring, fall, all that is just, and honestly, I mean, for me, every beekeeper thinks their honey's the best. I mean, you know, that's just, it's like your kids. So it's like, but there's little I can do. If it's not good, too bad for me, you know, because unless I move my hive, I can't do much about it. But what you do is you pull these frames. So that's a frame that's been pulled out of those boxes. You decap it. So importantly, honey is capped when it's less than 18% moisture content. So the bees miraculously have little refractometers that they can tell the moisture content. Over that and it'll ferment. So if the honey is capped, you know it's ripe. If it's not capped, it can ferment. So, and that's another function of the floral sources. So if I know if it's capped, then I know I can go in, I can decap it, I put it in this big tank and spin it. And it's the cells are at about 9 degrees, so that just spins out centrifugal force and then bottle it from there. Do not feed to infants under 1. There is a specific botulina toxin that babies don't develop until they're about a year old. So but that's in the soil, it's in everything, but just be careful. So, and I usually put that, if you're doing labeling, go ahead and do that, put that on your label. So this is the setup, basically from the boxes of supers that come in, over to decapping, to the capping tank, to the bucket, and then gets bottled eventually. So here's just a picture. Those are the almonds down on this corner. That's the almond trees pollinated by honeybees. Most people are familiar with that. 2/3 of our food supply is thankful to, we're thankful to bees, to honeybees for that. And that's even indirectly. You know, I tell people, because we battle this with legislative issues, with farm issues, agriculture. You know, a lot of people say, I don't even like honey, who cares? Beekeepers, those aren't even real animals, you know, get your gran away from here. And we have to go in and do a lot of educating to even people that are making laws to say, you may not like honey, but if you like any of this other stuff, even if you want your clover pollinated or your alfalfa or this other stuff, it's not just all about honey. You know, this is vital. And that's even little kids. We do a lot of stuff in schools, and, you know, the first thing the nursery school learns is, you know, I'm squishing the baby bumblebee. And you're like, you know, you're in there digging a hole from day one. But it's, you know, because they think they're, and my husband's a little like that. There's a lot of them, they're highly organized, and they have weapons. So based on that, you know, kids just think run away. But once you tell them, they die if they sting you. So that's not going to be, their first line of defense is not to sting you. So they'll ping your veil, they'll do other things, but they don't want it, they don't want to die. So you leave them alone, they leave you alone, and they're only a forager. They have jobs right after they're born. So they have these specific jobs, so they want to do their job, you know, like anybody else. They just leave me alone, let me do my job. So that's part of it. So we spend a lot of time trying to tell people to get over that fear, you know, that fear of bees. Although I will say, if you do get into beekeeping, keep an EpiPen. Even if you don't think you're allergic, you can develop a sensitivity, and that can be something that you can get stung 100 times, and 101 can be a problem. So especially if you're out on a farm or somewhere kind of remote, that's just safety anyway. You can get allergic to anything. So costs and marketing. So one of the biggest things people ask is, and then this is legitimate for any business, how much is this going to cost? How much work is it? And how much am I going to make? And then we say, you're a farmer, you know? I mean, is it going to rain next week? You know, I think we get so frustrated because some of the meteorologists around here, you know, they couldn't walk outside and tell you if it's raining today. And I'm asking them, when is going to be our last frost? When's going to be, you know, it's just, there's so many unknowns in there. But if you, but if you take a look at it and think about it from that business standpoint, you know there's variables. You plan for that. You know, it was really frustrating. We didn't get a drop of rain last June. So that clover honey that I'm normally kind of dependent on wasn't there. So something that I wanted to try, that I want to try to tell people is, you know, just go to, we'll get into that in just a second, but go to a local association, hang around a beekeeper for a year or so, and see what that life is like. You know, you don't want to be playing in the first game you watch, because then you're like, I had no idea it was this much work, or I had no idea that I was at the mercy of, if there's no rain on the clover in the fall, there's no nectar in the clover in the spring. So totally out of your control. So, but in general, as with anything, the first expense is the most. The first year, you're getting your equipment, you're getting your suit, your smoker, you're getting things that you won't have to invest in again. So, that's it. And it depends on if you can get swarms, you can get bees cheaply if you've got a friend that'll do a split. But we're saying about $1,200. As you all know, with prices this year, who knows? You know, and a lot of people say, we've got a wood shop. And first thing my husband was like, we're going to make all this. Well, about a month later, after he realized these are maybe not microns, but it's millimeters, bee space is a real thing. If you leave too much space, they fill it with comb. If you don't give them enough space, they don't use it. So bee construction is critical because it's something that you think, well, I do woodworking, I can just whip this out. The people that do it, and we've got some really great suppliers in Kentucky, some Amish farms as well, and for all of them, they've got jigs, they've got big equipment, and they can do it ultimately much cheaper than I can. So that temptation is there, and I don't want to discourage anybody from trying it, but be aware sometimes things are just cheaper to pay somebody else to do it when you look at your costs. So that's but particularly learn to make your own increases. Don't be at the mercy of somebody else because I didn't treat for mites, I didn't give food, I didn't have a good queen, and then I'm buying bees again. I mean, it's nice because people keep me in business selling nukes and queens, but I don't want to do that. I want people to be self-sufficient. That's the great thing about beekeepers. You know, we're selling, the United States consumes about 500 million pounds of honey every year, and we make about 150 million pounds. So there is plenty enough customers out there for all of us. We want everybody to be successful. So anyway, just look at your efficiencies there. Marketing, again, you've got propolis, honey, beeswax, the actual bees, nukes, queens, lots of opportunities there, and pollination. You know, these people going out for the almonds are getting about $300 a hive just to provide pollination for 3 weeks. So, but you know, you're paying diesel fuel to get all that out there too. So, but there's lots of things, you know, word of mouth, sign out front. We have the Kentucky State Beekeepers promotes a program called the Certified Kentucky Honey Producers. So, and we're Kentucky Proud members as well. But keep in mind, Kentucky Proud does allow honey to be brought into the state and bottled here, and that qualifies as Kentucky Proud. So when most people want local honey, we've got this Certified Kentucky Honey program that helps beekeepers market that. So, and also the state fair, we have a booth at the state fair. Please come visit us if you see the state fair, if you're there in August. We sold 32 members honey, beekeeper certified members, well, not just certified, but any Kentucky State Beekeepers members honey. We sold about $61,000 worth of honey in 10 days. So there's a demand there for honey. It's something that there's room for. Here's some resources. Like I said, your best bet's your local association, because that's where you're going to find a mentor, you're going to find hands-on. I have a lot of people I virtually mentor. I mean, I'm forever getting FaceTime. This is an emergency. Can you see the queen? Look what she's doing. She's going really fast. Is this okay? I'm okay with that. I give half the state's got my cell number, and that's something I want them. You need, but having a mentor makes a difference. Go in there for a year and say, where are your challenges? What are your questions? What are your expenses? What are your frustrations? And see if you want to be part of that world. I mean, I want everybody to be a beekeeper. I mean, my family will tell you, you know, the first thing they say is just do not start talking to her about bees because they know they're going to be there for the count. But I want everybody to do it. But you got to know what you're getting into. You know, you can't just stick that hive out there and stick some little bears next to it and go pick them up and sell them for Christmas. So know what you're getting into. Local and actual beekeepers is your best bet. Also us, KSBA. KYBs.org. It's $15 a year. We've got newsletters, we've got resources, we've got online classes. We're available. Bee schools, conferences. One of the best bee schools in the state was over at the university at KSU. We had about 300 people that came in. There was classes all day on a Saturday. Really something, a great resource. And also books. I mean, I have to throw YouTube out there, but again, you know, eat with caution on that thing because, you know, people are always, they'll ask me, so, and anytime they start a conversation with me with, hey, okay, so I was watching this guy on YouTube, and I know, you know, it could be anything from, you know, from roach motels and their hive to something legitimate. So be aware, but there are a lot of really good resources out there. So again, I know this has been drinking from a fire hose, but that's beekeeping. You know, there's always, there was affectionately we called him the old guy in Bluegrass Beekeepers, who was like 90 and bald and big beard and all this and real grumpy to everybody. And he said, the best thing I can tell you is every year it's just one daggone thing after another that you've never seen before. And I mean, that's farming, so it's, but you just have to be ready for it. So all right, so let's do some questions. So we've got about 10 minutes for questions or so. Yeah.
What's the difference with baker's honey? Can you explain baker's honey?
You have to be careful with some of that because it's just like Nat and I were talking about some of the fancy labradoodles, some of the fancy names they've got for for dogs and pets and stuff. Now, some of that is fancy, like KFC. We do a lot of stuff for kids, and they're like, I don't like honey. I get that stuff at KFC. You have to look at the label, to see, because that's not a USDA labeled item. Pure honey is the only thing that should be on the label. So I'm not sure if that's just a different way of marketing it, and that's baker's honey. Yeah.
They said it had a higher moisture content, so it wouldn't keep as well.
Oh, could be. So I've not heard of that, but that would be legitimate. The problem is it could ferment. Anything, honey's a supersaturated solution of sugar. So just like rock candy, if you supersaturate the water and stick a string in there and you've got a nucleation site, you develop crystallization. All honey will crystallize eventually, but you just warm it up and 100 degrees or so. But baker's honey, if for some reason they specifically want the higher moisture content, that could be the case. But if you get up above 20% or so, you've got a really limited shelf life before it ferments. So, and I'm not sure. I admit I'm a horrible baker, so I'm not a cook or baker at all. But if you want that moisture in there, I would think you'd be better off getting a stable honey and adding more water or something to it. But there may be a reason for that. But that'd be why. So, yeah.
Can you hear me? Oh, yes, there is. Okay. So having hives in town or on rooftops, is there a concern about people using insecticides or different herbicides affecting the honeybees, or has it been not as bad as one would think?
Well, so that's a good point, because people think if you're on farms you're at risk because obviously they're out there spraying crops, but in the city you have to be careful. Rooftops are probably less of a risk because there's not so much up there. But everybody, every time I see mosquito squad out there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm just like, oh no, because they can get that and take it back to their hive. So it is a concern. There is the pollinator protection program in the state. That's something that beekeepers register with. It's completely anonymous. It's just GPS. And farmers are supposed to, when they spray, go in and check and register and say that they're going to spray. That's not the case in the city. So if you've got ChemLawn next door, you do want to consider that. Normally, you can talk to your neighbors, talk to them anyway, because you want to make sure that none of their kids or them are not, anaphylactically allergic. But if you talk to them and say, I'll trade you some honey if you'll just let me know, or maybe not spray the dandelions, it's a good education. But if you live near a golf course, I'm going to say don't keep the hives there, because you just can't battle that. Pesticides are always a problem. So, but yeah, good question.
Hi. So you spoke briefly about requiring hives that have frames that can be pulled out by the inspector and looked at. Can you speak more about the regulatory requirements, particularly backyard beekeepers versus commercial, who to report to if you have to, it's whatever threshold, and do they need, do you need to invite the inspector out at a certain time in the year and so forth? Right,
yeah, so good questions. That's, in Kentucky, there's not much. The main thing is labels are controlled by the cabinet for food and family services. I forget what all the acronym is there. But the only thing is if you process over 500 pounds, 150 pounds in Kentucky, you have to have a honey house. You have to have like a certified kitchen kind of thing. Our surrounding states are 500 pounds. So that's something we're trying to tackle right now. Honeybees are not considered agriculture in Kentucky, so the bad side is you don't get the tax write-off for the expenses, but you're also not controlled under agriculture. So if you're in a neighborhood association that says no agriculture, and their intention is to get rid of goats or chickens or whatever, bees are not included in that. But there are homeowner associations that specifically exclude bees. But really, except for the 150-pound for the honey house and the and a homeowner association, there's no other regulation. Some states like Florida require that hives be registered, and that's with the state apiarist there, who's Tammy in our jurisdiction. But there's really no other regulations for honeybees in Kentucky. So we invite people to stay in touch with Tammy because she can be very helpful, and she'll come out and do USDA surveys for things like a pesticide kill if you think that happened, or diseases and stuff, but there's not really any other regulations. Bees are pretty much, if you haul the hive in there, you're home free. But feel free to reach out to us if you've got, homeowner association issues. We're usually pretty good about helping people work through that.
Does Tammy have the right to actually come out to your, so if she finds out from a neighbor, beekeeper that you have bees also, perhaps foul brood is a question, does she have the right to come onto your property and inspect your hives?
The only thing would be for American foul brood. And she's, she's a 150 hive beekeeper too, so she doesn't want to make this difficult, but I'm not sure. I'll ask her then and see. Typically, we've had 2 cases in the last 3 years, and those, she was working with the beekeeper. It wasn't like she just showed up one day and said, hey, somebody report American foul brood. She called them, and they said, yeah, we've got something big going on. We're really worried. Because we don't want to kill each other either, because if I let American foul brood, my hive's dead in 6 weeks, and I've killed all my neighbors' bees. So just as, just out of compassion, we don't want to do that. But I mean, I would think she probably would have the right to. It's never come to that I know of, though.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I have a very silly question.
We love silly questions.
You mentioned that, the bees will roam up to 3 miles to source all of their nectar. So how does one go about saying this is clover honey, this is buckwheat honey, this is this honey? Do you just have 3 miles worth of clover, or, how do you decide that?
That's not a silly, that's an excellent question, because we battle this all the time. In order to label your honey a monofloral source, it has to be 47% that source. And honey can be analyzed. See, like that slide could be like 3 days. The honey slide could be like 3 days. So there are various ways. Melissophaleology is the study of pollen. So that's very labor intensive. You dry it down, get somebody that's an expert that looks at the pollen and says, maple, buckwheat, palm, to do that. There's also DNA and NMR analysis. So DNA analysis of the honey is just like DNA analysis, for people. And DNA analysis and NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance, is another really high-tech way to do it. But you have to have some way of analyzing the honey and paperwork that shows you're 47% that floral source. So that's something, we're working with Bluegrass Community Technical College to be able to do DNA analysis. And there's also labs, a couple in Colorado, Jonah Ventures, some other places that actually do either melissophaleology or NMR analysis to do that. But you have, because honestly, yeah, you'd have to have a 6-mile diameter to show it's monofloral. Unless, like a lot of people here will catch black locust when it blooms, put those supers on, black locust blooms, 2 weeks later, pull those supers off, and they can usually catch black locust but it still has to be tested in order to do that. So yeah, good point. So so hopefully the idea here was just to kind of, get your curiosity and whet your appetite and see, it's harder. Again, you don't just set those hives out there with some little plastic jars, but it is hard, but it's incredibly therapeutic. The bees all have their job. They do their thing. If they're going crazy, if I go out there, then something's wrong, but it's something that I really do enjoy and hope other people could enjoy as well. Did you have a final question?
treat bees with medication?
Well, good, yeah. So there's tactile medication. So, and we've got a veterinarian in here too. That there is a veterinary feed directive that we can't do antibiotics, terramycin anymore. So we have, So Dr. Lay has gotten involved in bees in the last few years. There is a new vaccine for American foul brood. That's the biggest thing that's hit bees in maybe ever. And that will be delivered through a medicated feed. And this is the first time we've discovered that immunosystem and that immunoresponse is transmissible through an insect. Dr. Lay that's way out of my metallurgical field, but for what I did learn in biology, this is a huge thing. The rest of the medication are organic acids like oxalic acid, formic acid, that you can just put in the hive and it spreads. There's also amitraz and some other things that can go in on strips. Honeybee Health Coalition has a great website with videos. Some of those are permissible while are supers present, some are not, so you have to the label is the law. So it's important to go on there and look at that. But yeah, good question. Some tactile, some breathing, some of the oxalic acids actually kill the mites on contact. And we're hoping this immunosystem for American foul brood will be a game changer. So, Honeybee Health Coalition. Honeybee being one word. 15 seconds. Oh, yeah.
I had a friend of mine who had bees. Now I have a mic. And he was talking that I guess his hive, the queen made it with some other random bee or something, and it caused all of his honey to taste strange. Is that a thing? I don't know.
No.
I was just curious.
That may be a YouTube thing. That's No, the queen has nothing to do with honey. So that's just nectar brought in from flowers, and then they add different microbials in their system, in their honey crop, to change that nectar into honey, and that's strictly a function of the conditions in the hive. Okay. The dryness, so she could have come back mean. She could have mated with, because they'll mate with 20 drones, and she can come back mean for sure. But nothing that the queen does will affect the honey. But it's good to know because nobody knows anything about bees except they sting you. So it's great to ask questions because else you don't know. But if there's somebody that thinks that, have them reach out to KSBA and we can help them with what is going on in their hive. That's there's a lot of bees in Mississippi, but have them reach out because it's it's good. The more we know, the more we protect them, and the more we've got a stable food system. All right, good. All right, thank you all.